In the unforgiving dust of 1,885 Montana, kindness was a currency no one could afford to spend. But cruelty? That was free. When the town elite of Iron Creek decided to pull the ultimate prank, they sent Hannah Prentice, a woman mocked for her size and shy nature, into the lion's den. They told her the wildest stallion in the county needed a gentle touch. They expected her to be trampled. They expected the reclusive, dangerous cowboy Colton Bridger to run her off with a shotgun. They were wrong. This isn't just a romance. This is the true, gritty story of how a cruel joke backfired and created a legend. This is the taming of Iron Creek. Dust didn't just sit on the surfaces of Iron Creek. It worked its way into the pores of the skin and the seams of the soul. For Hannah Prentice, the dust was preferable to the eyes of the townsfolk. At 23 years old, Hannah carried a heaviness that had nothing to do with the flour sacks she hauled at her father's general store. Though the town of Iron Creek rarely looked past the physical, to them, she was Big Hannah. A fixture of the background, as sturdy and ignored as a support beam, until they needed something lifted or cleaned. The date was the 14th of October, 1885. The harvest dance was in full swing at the Copperhead Saloon, a place that smelled of stale beer, cheap perfume, and unwashed miners. Hannah hadn't wanted to come, but her father, Thomas Prentice, insisted. He was a good man, but blind to the subtle cruelties of social hierarchies. He thought Hannah needed airing out. Hannah stood in the shadowed corner near the kitchen doors, clutching a glass of tepid lemonade. She wore a dress of blue calico that she had sewn herself. It was expertly stitched. Hannah's hands were capable of delicate miracles, but she knew how the fabric pulled tight across her broad shoulders and hips. She felt the corset stays digging into her ribs like accusing fingers. Across the room, the laughter was sharp and brittle. It came from the Golden Circle, the group of ranchers' children and mine owners' wives who dictated the social laws of the territory. At the center was Lydia Barrow. Lydia was as sharp as a skinning knife and half as useful. She was draped in silk that cost more than Hannah's father made in a year. Hanging on Lydia's every word was Grady Sheldon. Grady was the foreman for the Miller Cattle Company, a man with a jawline carved from granite and a personality to match. He was handsome in a cruel way, the kind of man who spurred his horse hard just to hear it scream. "I'm telling you," Grady said, his voice carrying over the fiddle music intentionally, "that beast Bridger bought is going to kill him. Nobody breaks a horse like that. It's a man-eater. Bridger's been looking for a hand to help gentling it, but nobody's stupid enough to take the job." Lydia's eyes, bright with malice, scanned the room. They landed on Hannah in the corner. A slow, poisonous smile spread across her face. "Oh, I don't know, Grady," Lydia purred. "Maybe the horse just needs more substance to anchor it down. Someone with weight to throw around." The group erupted in snickers. Hannah stared at her boots, her face burning. She wished the floorboards would rot through and swallow her whole. Grady took a swig of whiskey, his eyes locking onto Hannah. "You know, I bet Bridger would pay a fortune for the right talent. He's desperate. He's up in that barn day and night." Lydia leaned in, whispering something to Grady. He threw his head back and laughed. He then detached himself from the group and sauntered toward Hannah. The room seemed to quiet down, the fiddle music fading into a dull buzz in Hannah's ears. "Miss Prentice," Grady said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. Hannah looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Sheldon, my associates and I were just discussing a business opportunity." Grady lied, his voice smooth as oil. "You know Colton Bridger? Lives up on the ridge?" Everyone knew Colton Bridger. He was a ghost story parents told their children. A former bounty hunter turned recluse. He lived on the most rugged patch of land in the territory. He came to town once a month for supplies, spoke to no one, and carried a Colt Navy revolver that looked like it had seen more use than a hammer. "I know of him," Hannah whispered. "Well," Grady continued, "he's got a new stallion, a wild thing. He put out the word he needs a specialized trainer, someone sturdy, someone who understands animals. I've seen you with your pa's mule, Hannah. You've got a way about you. Hannah frowned. I'm not a horse trainer, Mr. Sheldon. Bridger thinks otherwise. Grady lied effortlessly. He saw you at the store last week, asked about you, said he needed a woman's touch, but a strong woman, not one of these waifs. He gestured vaguely at Lydia, who was stifling a giggle behind a fan. He's offering $50 for a week's work, just to get the horse used to a rider. $50. That was enough to fix the leaking roof at the store and buy her father the medicine he needed for his cough. It was a fortune. Why didn't he ask me himself? Hannah asked, suspicion warring with hope. You know Bridger, Grady scoffed. He don't talk to people. He asked me to broker it. You go up there tomorrow morning, walk right into the barn, show him you aren't afraid. If you tame the horse, the money is yours. Hannah looked at Grady, then at Lydia, then at the $50 existing only in her imagination. She knew they were mocking her size. She knew they were sending her there because they thought the visual of a large woman on a horse was comedy. But she also thought of the empty cash box at home. I'll go, Hannah said, her voice steadying. Grady grinned, a shark smelling blood. That's the spirit. Tomorrow at dawn. Don't knock at the house, he hates that. Go straight to the barn and get on the horse. Surprise him. As Hannah left the saloon early, the roar of laughter that erupted behind her was loud enough to shake the dust from the rafters. She pulled her shawl tighter, shielding her body from the cold wind, unaware she was walking into a trap set by wolves. The ride to Colton Bridger's ranch took 3 hours by wagon. Hannah borrowed her father's buckboard, claiming she had a delivery for the miners up north. The lie tasted like copper in her mouth. The Bridger place, known as Dead Man's Drop, was harsh country. It was all jagged rock and scrub brush, culminating in a valley that looked like God had punched the earth in anger. The house was a sturdy, unpainted timber cabin that looked as if it had grown out of the ground. But the barn was the centerpiece, massive, red-painted, and looming. Hannah parked the buckboard 100 yards away, behind a cluster of pines, not wanting to intrude too boldly. She walked the rest of the way. The wind whipped her skirts around her legs. She was wearing her work clothes today, a heavy canvas skirt and a man's flannel shirt that she had tailored to fit her chest. She felt less like a doll and more like herself. The barn doors were cracked open. The smell hit her first sweet hay, pungent manure, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Not her fear, the horse's fear. Hannah stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Hello? She called out softly. Silence answered her, save for the heavy stomp of a hoof. She walked down the center aisle. There were 4 stalls on the left, 4 on the right. At the very end, in a reinforced box stall, was the shadow. As she approached, a massive head snapped up. It was a black stallion, easily 17 hands high. His coat was matted with dust and sweat, his eyes rolling white with panic. He didn't look like a domestic animal. He looked like a piece of the storm trapped in wood. This wasn't just a horse. This was the animal Grady had called a man-eater. Easy now, Hannah whispered. The horse snorted, ears pinned flat against his skull. He kicked out, the sound of hoofs striking timber echoing like a gunshot. Hannah stopped. She didn't retreat. She simply stopped moving. She knew animals. She knew them better than she knew people. People lied. Animals only reacted. This horse wasn't mean. He was terrified. He was cornered. They hurt you, didn't they? She murmured, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a low thrum in her chest. She saw the scars then. Rope burns on his neck, spur marks on his flanks. Someone had tried to break him with pain, and instead, they had broken his trust. Grady had told her to get on the horse. To surprise Bridger, Hannah knew looking at this animal that attempting to mount him would be suicide. But she also felt a strange, magnetic pull. She recognized the look in the stallion's eye. It was the same look she saw in the mirror, sometimes the look of something judged for its exterior. Something large and imposing that just wanted to be gentle. Slowly, Hannah sat down on a bale of hay outside the stall. She didn't look at the horse directly. She began to hum. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing, The Valley of Red River. The horse paced. He snorted, but the kicking stopped. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Hannah's deep, rich voice filled the barn, weaving a blanket of calm over the sharp edges of the morning. "You're a big one, aren't you?" she said conversationally to the air. "Me too. Takes up a lot of space, doesn't it?" Being big, the stallion stopped pacing. He turned his head, just an inch, toward her. Suddenly, the barn door creaked. The light from the entrance was blocked by a silhouette that seemed to fill the frame. Colton Bridger stood there. He was holding a Winchester rifle, the barrel pointed loosely at the ground. He was a mountain of a man, with dark hair curling over his collar and a beard that hid half his face. His eyes were the color of cold steel. He didn't speak. He just watched. He watched the fat girl from town sitting on a hay bale, talking to the horse that had broken 3 of his ribs the week prior. Hannah froze, the lullaby dying in her throat. She stood up, smoothing her skirts, her face flushing crimson. "Mr. Bridger, I can explain." Colt walked forward, his boots silent on the dirt floor. He stopped 5 feet from her. He smelled of gun oil, tobacco, and pine. He looked from her to the horse. For the first time in days, the stallion wasn't trembling. "Who sent you?" Colt asked. His voice was like grinding gravel. "Grady Sheldon," Hannah stammered, terrified but holding her ground. He said you needed a trainer, that you hired me." Colt's eyes narrowed. The lines around them deepened. He was not a stupid man. He knew Grady Sheldon. He knew the cruelty of the town. He looked at Hannah's terrified face, her size, and the absurdity of the request. He put the pieces together in a second. It was a prank. A joke to get a girl hurt or humiliated. He should have been angry. He should have chased her off his property for trespassing. But then the stallion let out a long, shuddering breath and lowered his head, sniffing toward Hannah's hand. Colt looked back at Hannah. He saw the way she stood, not cowering, but braced. He saw the dirt on her hands and the kindness in her face. "He lied to you," Colt said flatly. Hannah's face crumbled. The humiliation hit her like a physical blow. I knew it. I knew it was a joke." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and shameful. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bridger. I'll leave. I won't bother you again." She turned to rush past him, desperate to get to her wagon and disappear. "Wait." The word was a command. Hannah stopped. Colt looked at the horse, then back at her. "You got a name?" "Hannah. Hannah Prentice." "Well?" "Hannah Prentice," Colt said, leaning his rifle against a post. "Grady Sheldon is a liar and a son of a bitch." "I didn't hire you." Hannah nodded, staring at her boots, ready to run. "But," Colt continued, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pouch of tobacco, "that horse there is named Whiskey. He's killed 2 men in Wyoming and crippled 1 here. I haven't been able to get within 10 feet of him without a fight for a month." Colt gestured with his chin toward the stall. Whiskey was now resting his nose on the top rail, watching Hannah. "He likes you," Colt said, sounding genuinely baffled. "I don't know what you were singing, but he likes it." "It's just a lullaby," Hannah whispered. Colt studied her. He looked at her sturdy frame, her capable hands. He saw a woman who knew what it was like to be looked at as a monster. "You good with a pitchfork? Can you muck a stall?" Yes, sir. I do it for my pa's mule. Can you cook?" "Yes." Colt nodded, as if making a decision that would change the rotation of the earth. "I can't pay $50 a week?" "That's a lie, Grady told you, but I can pay 20. And room and board." Hannah's jaw dropped. "Sir, I need a hand," Colt said, turning to walk back toward the sunlight. "And Whiskey needs a friend. You want the job or not?" Hannah looked at the terrifying man walking away, then at the terrifying horse who was blinking at her softly. She thought of the laughter in the saloon. She thought of returning to town, humiliated. "I'll take it," she called out. Colt didn't stop walking, but she saw the slight tilt of his head. "Good. Put your wagon in the shed. We start now." The arrangement was unorthodox, and by the standards of 1,000, 885. Scandalous. A single woman living on a ranch with a bachelor? The tongues in Iron Creek would wag until they fell out, but Hannah didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was away from the eyes that judged her waistline. Here, she was judged by her work, and the work was hard. Colt Bridger was a taskmaster. He didn't pamper her. He expected her to haul water, chop wood, and mend fences. He watched her struggle with the heavy water buckets that first week. His arms crossed on the porch. He didn't offer to help. It made Hannah angry. "I thought you needed help, not a slave," she snapped on the third day. Her hands blistered. Colt looked at her over his coffee cup. "If I carry it for you, you don't get stronger. If you don't get stronger, whiskey will knock you down, and you won't get up. Do you want to be helped, Hannah? Or do you want to be capable?" It was the most he had said to her in 3 days. And it hit her hard. He wasn't mocking her weakness. He was demanding her strength. She carried the water. She didn't complain again. The house was a reflection of Colt, sparse, functional, and cold. But there were ghosts here. In the dusting of the mantel, Hannah found a daguerreotype photograph tucked behind a clock. It was a picture of a woman slender, delicate, beautiful, and a younger, smiling Colt. Hannah put it back quickly, feeling like a thief. Her days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for chores. Afternoons were for whiskey. Colt had forbidden her from entering the stall. "Talk to him over the rail," he ordered. "Don't go in until I say so." So she talked. She read to the horse from an old Bible she found. She told him about the town, about Lydia's mean laugh, about how much she loved the smell of rain. She named the horse Whiskey because of his color, a deep, burnished, dark bay that looked like liquor in a dark bottle, and because he had a kick like a hangover. By the second week, Whiskey was greeting her with a whinny. One evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the valley walls. Hannah was in the kitchen, kneading dough for biscuits. Colt was by the fire, cleaning his revolver. A crack of thunder sounded like a cannon blast. From the barn, a high-pitched scream of terror erupted. "Whiskey," Hannah gasped. She didn't think. She grabbed the lantern and ran out into the rain. "Hannah, wait!" Colt shouted, jumping up. She didn't wait. She burst into the barn. Whiskey was thrashing in his stall, rearing up and striking the wood. He was going to hurt himself. He was caught in a flashback of whatever abuse he had suffered. Hannah threw open the stall door. "No," Colt roared from the barn entrance. "He'll kill you." Hannah stepped inside the stall. The massive stallion reared above her, hooves slashing the air, 1,000 pounds of panic. Hannah didn't flinch. She spread her arms wide, making herself as big as possible. "Enough," she bellowed. Her voice wasn't soft this time. It was a roar, deep and resonant, coming from the core of her heavy frame. The horse froze, hooves slamming into the dirt inches from her toes. He trembled, eyes wide, looking at her. "I am here," Hannah said, her voice dropping to that low, vibrating thrum. "I am here. You are safe. I am the mountain, Whiskey. You cannot move me." She stepped forward. The horse backed up. She stepped forward again. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his sweating chest. He flinched, but he didn't strike. She could feel his heart hammering against her palm like a trapped bird. "Breathe," she commanded, slowly. The horse lowered his head. He rested his muzzle on Hannah's shoulder, exhaling a long, shuddering breath that rattled his ribs. Hannah wrapped her thick arms around his neck, burying her face in his mane, indifferent to the rain-soaked clothes clinging to her body. Colt stood by the open stall door. He was soaked to the bone, his chest heaving from his run. He watched the woman he had hired, the woman the town had thrown away, calm the beast that had terrified grown men. He looked at her wet hair, plastering against her neck. He looked at the curve of her back, the strength in her arms. For the first time, he didn't see an employee. He didn't see a charity case. He saw a force of nature. "You're crazy," Colt said quietly, stepping into the stall. Hannah didn't let go of the horse. She looked at Colt, her eyes defiant. He was scared. "He could have crushed you." "He didn't." Colt reached out, not to the horse, But to Hannah, he brushed a strand of wet hair from her forehead. His fingers were rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. The touch lingered for a second too long. "Go inside, Hannah," he said, his voice rough. "Dry off. I'll finish up here." Hannah nodded and slipped past him. As she walked back to the house, her heart was beating faster than it had when the horse reared. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something dangerous. 3 weeks turned into a month. The change in the ranch was palpable. The windows were clean. The food was edible, better than edible. It was hearty and rich. Hannah had brought life to the dead timber, and the change in whiskey was miraculous. He followed Hannah around the paddock like a dog. She had him accepting a saddle blanket. Then a saddle. She hadn't ridden him yet. Colt insisted that he be the first, for safety, but the horse was ready. Colt had changed too. The silence in the house had been replaced by conversation. They talked about cattle prices, about the weather, about books. Colt watched her more often. He watched her hands when she sewed. He watched the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. But the world outside Dead Man's Drop had not forgotten them. On a Tuesday, a rider approached the ranch. It was Sheriff Dooley, a man who tried to be good, but was easily swayed by the rich. Hannah was on the porch, churning butter. Colt came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Bridger," the sheriff called out, not dismounting. He tipped his hat awkwardly to Hannah. "Miss Prentice." "Sheriff," Colt said, his hand drifting near his hip. "What brings you out?" "Town's talking, Colt," the sheriff said, shifting in his saddle. "People are saying you're holding the Prentice girl against her will. Her father is worried." "My father knows where I am," Hannah said, standing up. "I wrote him a letter." "Well," the sheriff coughed, "Grady Sheldon says otherwise. He says he saw Bridger drag you off." Colt's eyes went cold. "Grady Sheldon is a liar." "Maybe so," the sheriff said. "But the Millers, Grady's bosses, they're filing a complaint. They say you stole that horse, Colt. Say the bill of sale was forged. I bought this horse fair and square from the Cheyenne." Colt spat. "They want the horse seized until it's sorted, and they want Miss Prentice returned to her father." "I am not a piece of property," Hannah shouted, stepping off the porch. "I am an employee. I am earning a wage, and I am staying." The sheriff looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. "Miss Prentice, it ain't proper. You up here alone with him. It's none of your damn business what's proper." Colt stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "She stays. The horse stays. You tell Miller if he wants whiskey, he can come take him from me." The sheriff sighed. "I didn't want trouble, Colt, but Miller is powerful. He's coming, and he's bringing men." He turned his horse and rode off. Hannah looked at Colt. "They're coming to take whiskey? They're coming to take everything," Colt said. He turned to her. "They found out the horse is tamed. They know he's valuable now. That's why they want him. They set you up to fail, and now that you've succeeded, they want to steal the profit." He grabbed her shoulders. "Hannah, you need to go. Take the buckboard. Go back to town. It's going to get ugly here." "No," Hannah said. "Hannah, listen to me." "No." She pulled away. "I am not running away. I am the one who gentled that horse. I am the one who lives here. You asked if I wanted to be capable? Well, I am capable." She walked past him into the house and came out a moment later holding his spare Winchester. She checked the chamber with a practiced motion she must have learned from her father. "Show me where you want me," she said. Colt stared at her. He looked at the curve of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He felt a chest-tightening sensation that he hadn't felt in 10 years. It was admiration, and it was desire. "Okay," Colt said. "But if shooting starts, you get down. You hear me?" "I hear you." They spent the night keeping watch. They sat on the porch, a lantern burning low between them. "Why did you stay?" Colt asked, suddenly, the darkness hiding his face. "After you knew it was a joke. Why stay with a mean bastard like me?" Hannah looked out at the stars. "Because when I'm here, I don't feel heavy, Colt. I feel necessary." Colt reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm. "You are necessary, Hannah. You're the most necessary thing I've found in a long time." He leaned in. The air between them crackled, hotter than the summer storm. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was hungry, desperate, and real. Hannah made a sound in her throat and leaned into him, her hands tangling in his hair. For a moment, the dust, the danger, and the cruel town didn't exist. There was only the cowboy and the girl who had tamed his horse and his heart. But the moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats, many of them. "Get inside," Colt hissed, extinguishing the lantern. "They're here." The moon had been swallowed by storm clouds, leaving the ranch in a suffocating darkness broken only by the occasional jagged streak of lightning. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension. Colt moved with the efficiency of a man who had expected war his entire life. He overturned the heavy oak table, shoving it against the window facing the main road. "They aren't here for justice, Hannah," Colt said, his voice low as he loaded shells into a second revolver. "Sheriff Dooley is a weak man, but Grady Sheldon is a vicious one. If they take you, they'll ruin your reputation to cover their tracks. If they take the horse, they'll kill it trying to break it again." Hannah stood by the fireplace, the cold weight of the Winchester rifle in her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the storm outside. But her hands were steady. The trembling girl who had walked into the barn a month ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who had looked a monster in the eye and sung it to sleep. "I'm not leaving, Colt," she said, her voice cutting through the dark. "And neither is whiskey. Get down." Colt's warning came a split second before the glass of the front window shattered. A bullet tore through the room, embedding itself in the log wall inches from Hannah's head. She dropped to the floor, crawling behind the overturned table next to Colt. "Fire!" a voice shouted from outside Grady's voice. "Burn them out if you have to. I want that horse." "That's murder, Grady," came the sheriff's panicked reply, though it was weak and distant. "It's justice," Grady roared. "Bridger stole that animal and kidnapped the girl." Another volley of gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed into the wood of the cabin, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Colt rose slightly, firing 2 quick shots through the broken window. A cry of pain echoed from the darkness. "They're trying to flank us," Colt gritted out, ducking back down. "They're going for the barn. They want to smoke us out here so they can take whiskey out the back." Hannah's blood ran cold. The barn was dry timber, 1 torch, and whiskey would be trapped in an inferno. "Cover me," Hannah said, checking the lever on her rifle. Colt looked at her, his eyes wide. "What?" "No. Hannah, stay here. They don't know I can shoot," she said, her jaw set in a line of granite. "They think I'm a helpless fat girl who got tricked. They aren't watching the back door." Before Colt could stop her, Hannah scrambled toward the kitchen. She kicked open the back door and slipped into the rainy night. The cold wind slapped her face, grounding her. She didn't run. She moved with the heavy, deliberate purpose she used when hauling grain sacks. She merged with the shadows, her dark skirt blending into the gloom. She circled wide, coming up behind the corral fence. Through the slats, she saw them. 3 men were creeping toward the barn door. One of them held a lit torch, the flames sputtering in the drizzle. It was Grady Sheldon. Hannah raised the Winchester. She didn't aim for the man. She aimed for the torch. She took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like a whip. The torch exploded in Grady's hand, sending a shower of sparks onto his coat. He screamed, dropping the burning wood and slapping at his sleeve. "Who fired that?" he yelled, spinning around, his gun raised blindly. "I did," Hannah's voice boomed from the darkness. "Step away from my horse, Grady." Grady squinted into the rain. "Hannah? Is that you, you stupid cow? Get out here. We're here to save you." "I don't need saving from him," Hannah shouted, cycling the action of the rifle. "I need saving from you. You sent me here to die, didn't you? You thought the horse would kill me, and you'd all have a laugh at the funeral." Grady laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You were just a prop, Hannah. A joke. Nobody cares about you. Now put the gun down before I—" The barn doors suddenly exploded outward. Colt hadn't stayed inside. He had slipped out the front while Hannah distracted them, circling to the barn. But he hadn't come out shooting. He had done something riskier. He had opened the stall. Whiskey charged out of the barn, a black thunderbolt of muscle and rage. The stallion wasn't just fleeing. He was attacking. He had smelled the smoke, heard the gunshots, and recognized the scent of the man who had abused him, Grady. The men scattered like dry leaves. Whiskey reared, his hooves flashing in the lightning. He struck one of the hired guns, sending him flying into the mud. Grady froze. The horse he had tormented, the man-eater, turned toward him. Whiskey snorted, a plume of steam erupting from his nostrils. "Shoot it!" Grady screamed, backing up, fumbling with his revolver. "Kill the beast!" "No!" Hannah broke cover, sprinting across the mud. She didn't raise her rifle. She ran straight into the line of fire, placing herself between Grady's gun and the stallion. "Hannah, move!" Colt shouted from the shadows. "Don't you dare!" Hannah screamed at Grady, her chest heaving. She stood with her arms spread wide, a human shield protecting the monster. "You want to kill him? You have to shoot me first. And you know what, Grady? I'm a big target. You can't miss." Grady's hand wavered. He was cruel, but he wasn't ready to murder a woman in cold blood in front of witnesses. Sheriff Dooley had ridden up by now, his lantern illuminating the scene, the massive horse trembling with rage, the pouring rain, and Hannah Prentice standing like a fortress in the mud. "Put the gun down, Sheldon," the sheriff ordered, his voice finally finding some steel. "This has gone too far." Grady looked at Hannah. He looked at the hate in her eyes. He lowered his gun, spitting on the ground. "This isn't over, Bridger. I'll see you in court. I'll take this ranch piece by piece." "Get off my land," Colt said, stepping up beside Hannah, his revolver leveled at Grady's chest. As the posse retreated into the storm, dragging their injured man, the adrenaline drained out of Hannah. She sagged, her knees hitting the mud. Whiskey, the stallion who had just crippled a man, lowered his head. He nudged Hannah's shoulder gently, blowing warm air against her cheek. Colt dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms. He didn't say a word. He just held her, burying his face in her wet hair, while the horse stood guard over them both. The courtroom in Iron Creek was stiflingly hot, packed to the rafters with spectators. It seemed the entire town had turned out to see the spectacle: the recluse, the beast, and the obese girl. Judge Thaddeus H. Cobb sat behind the high bench, fanning himself with a folded newspaper. He was a circuit judge, a man known for his impatience with theatrics and his adherence to the letter of the law. Grady Sheldon sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by a lawyer from the Miller Cattle Company. They looked polished, confident, and predatory. Colt and Hannah sat at the defense table. They had no lawyer. Colt wore his only suit, which was tight in the shoulders. Hannah wore a new dress she had made emerald green, simple and elegant. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded on the table. She refused to shrink. "Order!" Judge Cobb banged his gavel. "Mr. Sheldon claims that the defendant, Colton Bridger, obtained the stallion known as Whiskey through fraud and is currently harboring Miss Hannah Prentice against the wishes of her family and the community. Let's hear it." Grady took the stand. He spun a tale of woe. He claimed Colt had tricked the Cheyenne sellers, that the horse belonged to the Miller Company by rights of a prior verbal agreement, and that Colt had kidnapped Hannah to force her into servitude. The town murmured. Lydia Barrow, sitting in the front row, smirked behind her fan. "And," Grady added, looking directly at the jury, "everyone knows Miss Prentice isn't capable of the work described. Bridger is clearly using her." Colt stood up. "I object." "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "On the grounds that he's a liar," Colt said simply. "Sit down, Mr. Bridger." The judge sighed. "Call your witness." Colt looked at Hannah. "I call Hannah Prentice." A hush fell over the room as Hannah took the stand. She swore on the Bible. "Miss Prentice," Colt said, stepping forward. He didn't act like a lawyer. He spoke to her like they were alone in the kitchen. "Did I kidnap you?" "No," Hannah said clearly. "Did I force you to stay?" "No. You tried to make me leave when the danger started. I chose to stay." Colt paused. "Why?" Hannah looked out at the crowd. She saw the faces that had mocked her for years. She saw the men who wouldn't dance with her, the women who whispered about her appetite. "Because," Hannah said, her voice steady and resonant, "Mr. Bridger was the first person in this town who didn't look at me and see a joke. He saw a worker. He saw a partner." She turned to Grady. "Mr. Sheldon sent me to that barn because he thought it would be funny to see the fat girl get trampled. He thought my life was worth less than a moment of amusement." The courtroom went deadly silent. "But I didn't get trampled," Hannah continued. "I tamed the horse. And I didn't do it with a whip, like Mr. Sheldon tried. I did it with patience. I did it with weight. The very thing you all mocked me for my size. My presence, that is what the horse needed. He needed something solid to anchor him." "Objection," the Miller lawyer shouted. "This is emotional drivel." "Overruled," Judge Cobb said, leaning forward. "I want to hear this." Hannah stood up in the witness box. "You want to know who owns that horse? The man who bought him. But you want to know who earned that horse?" "I did. Prove it." Grady sneered from his table. "It's a killer animal. It's locked in the corral outside. I bet you can't even get near it without Bridger holding a gun on it." Colt looked at the judge. "Is that a challenge, Your Honor?" Judge Cobb smiled a thin, dry smile. "Court is recessed. Everyone to the corral." The scene outside the courthouse was chaotic. Whiskey had been brought into town in a reinforced cage wagon. He was currently pacing in the public corral, agitated by the noise and the smell of the crowd. He looked dangerous, his eyes rolling, his teeth baring at anyone who came close. "Go on then," Grady shouted. "Show us the miracle." Hannah didn't hesitate. She unlatched the gate. Hannah, her father, Thomas Prentice, called out from the crowd, his face pale. "Don't. It's all right, Papa," she said softly. She walked into the center of the corral. The dust swirled around the hem of her green dress. Whiskey stopped pacing. He turned his massive head toward her. He snorted, pawing the ground. The crowd held its breath. Lydia Barrow looked eager for blood. Hannah didn't whistle. She didn't shout. She simply hummed. The low, vibrating melody of the Valley of Red River carried on the wind. She raised her hand. "Come here." "Boy." To the shock of 300 people, the man-eater trotted forward. He didn't charge. He approached her like a foal seeking its mother. He lowered his head, and Hannah pressed her forehead against his nose. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of apple. The horse took it gently from her palm. Then, Hannah did the impossible. She grabbed a handful of mane. She didn't have a saddle. She didn't have a mounting block. She used her strength, the strength she had built, hauling water and mucking stalls. She swung her heavy leg over the stallion's back. The horse didn't buck. He stood like a statue. Hannah sat tall on the massive animal. She looked down at the crowd. She looked at Grady Sheldon, who was staring with his mouth open, his face the color of ash. "Judge Cobb," Hannah called out from atop the horse. "I believe the defense rests." Judge Cobb laughed, a booming sound that broke the tension. "Judgment for the defendant. The horse stays with Bridger. And Mr. Sheldon, if you ever waste my time with a prank like this again, I'll have you breaking rocks in the territorial prison." The cheer that went up wasn't from the elite. It was from the miners. It was from the shopkeepers. It was from the people who knew what it was like to be small, even when they were big. Colt walked into the corral. He didn't care about the crowd. He walked up to Hannah, reached up, and took her hand. "You show off," he murmured, a smile breaking through his beard. "I had to be capable," she whispered back, tears finally spilling over. The scandal of 1,885 didn't end with the sharp crack of a gavel or the scratching of a pen in a ledger. It ended 3 months later, on a crisp morning that smelled of melting snow and new pine, right in the center aisle of the barn at Dead Man's Drop. It was not the sort of wedding Iron Creek was accustomed to. There were no imported silks from the East, no string quartets playing Mozart, and certainly no invitations sent to the home of Lydia Barrow. Yet, despite the lack of society approval, the wagons lined the ridge for a mile. They came from the mines, from the smaller homesteads, and from the edges of town where the people who knew the value of hard work lived. The barn, once a place of terror and isolation, had been transformed. The very stall where whiskey had once kicked holes in the timber was now draped in garlands of wild sage and winter juniper. The air didn't smell of fear anymore. It smelled of roasted meat, fresh sawdust, and hope. Thomas Prentice stood at the barn entrance, his eyes wet as he offered his arm to his daughter. For years, he had watched Hannah try to shrink herself to fit into a world that had no room for her. He had watched her hunch her shoulders and lower her chin. But today, Hannah Prentice did not shrink. She wore a dress of her own making, a deep cream-colored wool that flowed around her form like water. There was no corset binding her ribs, no stays digging into her flesh to force an unnatural silhouette. She moved with the heavy, graceful power of the mountains themselves. As she walked down the aisle, the packed dirt floor swept clean by her own hands. The miners took off their hats, and the women hushed their children. They weren't looking at Big Hannah anymore. They were looking at the woman who had walked into a lion's den and come out leading the lion. Colt Bridger waited for her at the altar, which was nothing more than an overturned crate covered in a quilt. He was clean-shaven for the first time in a decade, his jaw strong and his eyes clear. When he looked at her, the breath left his lungs. He didn't see a charity case, and he didn't see a victim. He saw the only person in the territory who possessed a spine as stiff as his own. They exchanged vows that were less about obedience and more about survival. They promised to hold the line. They promised to carry the water when the other was too tired. They promised that no matter how hard the winter, the fire in the hearth would not go out. "I take you," Colt said, his voice rough with emotion, "as my partner, in the saddle and in the storm." When the ceremony ended, the celebration that followed shook the dust from the rafters, and watching it all from the paddock, his head resting over the fence rail, was Whiskey. The stallion was calm, his ears pricked forward, watching the two humans who had healed him just as much as he had healed them. Years began to roll over the valley, turning the seasons like the pages of a well-loved book. The name Dead Man's Drop slowly faded from the vernacular of the territory, replaced by a new name, the Bridger Horse Ranch. It became a sanctuary for the broken. Colt and Hannah didn't just breed horses, they rehabilitated them. They took in the violently abused Mustangs, the skittish mares that other ranchers had given up on, and the stallions deemed too dangerous to keep alive. They developed a reputation that spread as far as Wyoming and the Dakotas. They didn't break horses with whips and spurs. They gentled them. Travelers would often stop just to watch them work. They would see Colt in the round pen, his movements economical and firm, and Hannah standing in the center, her presence a grounding anchor. She used her voice, that deep, resonant hum, to settle the panic in the animals. She used her size not to intimidate, but to reassure a solid, immovable object that promised safety. As their legend grew, others faded. Grady Sheldon, unable to escape the humiliation of the trial and the loss of his reputation, eventually drank himself out of his position at the Miller Company. He drifted south toward New Mexico, a bitter, hollow man who became a footnote in a story he thought he was writing. He was forgotten, swallowed by the very dust he had tried to force Hannah into. But the Bridgers remained. Decades passed, turning Colt's hair the color of iron and etching deep lines of laughter into Hannah's face. They grew old in the way that strong things do, weathering, settling, but never crumbling. The most enduring image of their life, the one that the grandchildren of those miners would talk about for 50 years, was not the dramatic courtroom showdown. It was the quiet evenings on the porch. On one such evening, the sun was dipping below the peaks, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of drying hay. Colt sat in his rocker, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of rope work. Hannah sat beside him, her chair creaking rhythmically. In the lower pasture, a herd of horses grazed, their tails swishing in the twilight. Among them were the descendants of Whiskey, strong and spirited. But kind. Colt stopped rocking. He looked over at his wife. Her profile was silhouetted against the dying light, as sturdy and beautiful as the day she had walked into his barn. "You know," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "They sent you here as a joke." Hannah smiled. It was a small, private smile that reached her eyes. She watched the fireflies beginning to dance in the tall grass, tiny sparks of light in the coming dark. She reached out and took his hand, her grip as warm and reassuring as the earth itself. "I know," she said, squeezing his fingers. "But the joke was on them, Colt. They thought they were sending a victim. They didn't know they were sending the only person who could handle you." Colt laughed, a sound that was no longer rusty, but worn smooth by years of joy. He looked at the woman who had filled the empty spaces of his life with music and strength. "That's the truth, Hannah," he whispered, closing his eyes contentedly. "That's the honest truth. The dust of Montana is unforgiving, and it buries many things. But some stories are too heavy to be blown away. It remembers the woman who was too big for the town, but just the right size for the legend." Hannah Prentice and Colton Bridger proved that worth isn't measured in waistlines or social standing, but in the strength of the spirit and the capacity to love the unlovable. The town of Iron Creek sent Hannah to the barn to be broken, but instead, she built a life that became a legend. She taught a man to trust, a horse to breathe, and a town to see beyond the surface. In the end, the joke created a legacy that outlasted them all. If this story touched your heart, or if you've ever felt judged by people who couldn't see your true worth, please give this video a like. It really helps us share these stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale from the frontier. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they are enough, just as they are. Thanks for watching.